And our show falls into the category of a little bit of a rant, what I call the wink, a couple of interviews, and then a wrap up or various subjects. Today, I want to spend time talking to one man about the situation that we live in this country. Tim Hale, who we'll talk to in a moment, was a January 6th prisoner, but he wasn't, in my mind, a normal prisoner. He was a prisoner that was targeted in all of the ways that the regime has done this. They've used the law incorrectly. They've used the prosecutorial power incorrectly. They've used the prisons incorrectly. And by the way, I'm saying incorrect. I should say unjustly. They've used the personal property of the defendant incorrectly, unjustly, immorally, certainly immoral. And it's an extraordinary thing. And as people have talked, last week, the U.S. Supreme Court dealt with the 1512, the use of a law that was never intended, never designed, doesn't say that it can be used the way they did it. And the Supreme Court knocked that down. And all across the country, and especially in the Washington, D.C. area, but across the country, there are men and a few women who have been charged with this 1512 charge and convicted or pled guilty that are going to now have to try to reclaim their freedom, reclaim their record, reclaim their lives. That's a lot harder. And one of the things that we must do is get to the bottom of who did this, who decided to target American citizens the way they did. This is all about January 6th. This is all about what happened, the conduct of people in power. That's what I'm talking about there. But the faces and the lives of the people who were targeted, the people, you know Donald Trump's face, he was targeted, but the people who've been targeted that may be sort of lost in the fray, lost in the numbers, lost in the failed coverage. That's another failure, the unjust coverage of the fake news. And so Tim Hale is an extraordinary guy. I've gotten to know him really well. I'd say we're friends over the last few years, and especially in the last month since he's been out of jail, since he's been out of prison, gotten to see him work, see his writings, all these kinds of things. Extraordinary guy. But he has what I would say is a very important kind of exemplar, an example of how the regime targeted an American citizen. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Tim Hale. Tim, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well, Ed. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. But first, let me ask the question. I'm down here in the swamp. You're home in New Jersey. But there's a lot of talk of the D.C. gulag, the prison. A prisoner like you was held there. I want you to talk about what that was really like. Not, one of the problems is even the guys and gals on the side of justice sometimes are exaggerating. Sometimes the reality was bad enough. So tell us what the jail here, the prison here in D.C. was like, and maybe what the other ones where you had to serve some of your time in terms of the security, the level of limitations. What was it like?
Sure. Well, first, it's worth noting that, of course, D.C. doesn't have a prison. It has a jail.
Right.
And when you think of a jail, you typically think of a place where someone goes there to be held until they're eventually released or their case is adjudicated for something else. Those of us who were held inside of the jail in DC were pretrial detainees. And so essentially we were there waiting until we would be released on bond pending trial. Or in the case of most of us, we were denied bond and we were forced to sit in that jail until we could either go to trial or take a plea deal. And so what inevitably happened is that Washington, D.C., as you know, is probably as bad or worse than every deep blue state in the union. And so COVID was used as a Trojan horse to keep us in isolation and solitary confinement for about a year, to varying degrees. But essentially, we were denied not just due process, we were pretty much denied any sense of treatment as citizens. We were denied all civil liberties. We were kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. We were denied access to any religious services. We were denied visitation from our families. We were often denied visits from our own lawyers. For a good chunk of time, we were denied access to our evidence, so we couldn't work on our cases, which is extremely burdensome for any defendant, but especially if you're a pretrial detainee. So we couldn't even work on our cases most of the time. There was a time where we eventually got access to a law library via some sort of tablet. And then after people like me got a little too good at using it, they actually ended up stripping features from it. Essentially, they did everything they could to sabotage our cases, to crush our souls, and to force us into taking plea deals or
Uh,
into ratting on others.
which
What
on,
ended up happening was I mean, it basically is a cautionary tale, I think.
uh-huh.
I mean, I want to make clear too, the DC jail is bad for everyone. When Marjorie Taylor Greene and Louis Gohmert went in the DC jail, they were horrified by the conditions in general. But
Right,
what made our case so egregious was that after a certain point, they weren't even pretending that it was about COVID. They still denied us religious services.
right.
While people could go to mosque on the other side of the jail, we weren't allowed to go to church. And so there was a deliberate effort to pummel us into submission. Again, this is a cautionary tale. If they can do it to us, they can do it to anybody.
Tim Hale is our guest, and Tim Hale was a January 6th prisoner. How many days did you serve in jail?
Well, I was incarcerated. Okay. I was incarcerated for approximately, I'm going to say 2 years. We maybe even we'll lowball it at 21 months in jail. And then I served about a year or more than that in prison. So I was incarcerated approximately 3 years. And,
okay. So on January 6th, if I remember correctly, you worked. So you worked the day before, maybe, and drove down to Washington, D.C. First of all, what was your job? What was your job history? What was the job you're in? And then walk me through before everything to when you get to Washington, D.C. city limits. But what was your job? What did you, is that right? Did you work the day before, the night before?
I did. I'd actually, and this actually plays a little into my mindset at the time. I had gone a couple days without any sleep at all. I worked overnights. I was actually a naval weapons contractor.
Wait. You were a naval weapons contractor for the United States Navy. You were a civilian employee, but you were cleared to work on naval weapons, right?
Correct. I was actually responsible for taking stock of naval ordnance. The base I worked on and had an apartment on, actually, that's where we restocked warships. So I had a security clearance. I was certified to protect as an armed guard as well, protect the base from intrusion. So even when I wasn't an Army administrator, as a reservist or otherwise, when I wasn't working for the Army, I was working for the Navy.
Wait a second. So let me pause. Let me pause there, because I don't want our viewers that are watching this. I hope people are going to watch this and learn what one man's a target was. You were an Army reservist for almost 12 years before the January 6th. So you're a reservist, meaning you're working a couple of months, a couple weekends a month, one or more weekends a month, a couple weeks a year, and you've done that successfully as an administrator in the Army Reserves?
Correct. Yes, I was an administrator at the headquarters level.
Okay.
Essentially, I worked directly under the command of the unit.
Okay.
So I was responsible for administration. I was responsible for, basically, I kind of did all the scheduling, and I made sure that the unit operated.
It's not as
fun as it sounds.
Yeah, well, of course, but I mean, not to be disrespectful to people that don't have a job or live on the streets. You were not somebody that didn't have a job and lived on the streets. You had a full, successful career, and again, I worked for many years in my youth at a supermarket. You weren't working at a supermarket or a warehouse. You're working for the Army and for the Navy, meaning you had to have a certain, if you didn't have a certain level of competence and confidence in you, you wouldn't be working there. So that's a setup first, that you weren't coming at this unemployed, underemployed. You weren't coming at this, angry at anything. Or maybe say differently, as I said, you had the confidence of your employers, which were big employers. Now, you didn't work, you worked a couple days in a row before January 6th. Now, get me from those days down to the city limits in D.C.
Right. Well, so I worked overnights. I was on the third shift. I was working as a guard, and I was also the union representative for the contractors. So I was always working, even when I was off shift. When I wasn't on a shift, when I was off duty, I was always working because I had to settle the affairs of other employees. I also had to deal with the management, which wasn't easy, and that ultimately led to my downfall because my managers are the ones who tipped off the feds I was at the Capitol.
I see.
So I got off of duty the morning of January 6th, but the night before I started my shift, I went out to Men's Warehouse and I bought some brand new dress shoes for my suit. I went to the Capitol that morning in a suit and tie. I blasted down in my truck from New Jersey down to DC in about 4 hours or so. And I just wandered around.
Wait. So wait.
I had no idea.
So you arrive down with your truck. You drive down your truck. You're by yourself, right? Had you contacted your buddies to meet you there? Had you heard from anybody else they'd be there, or were we just saying, you know what, there's going to be a big speech, the president's going to talk, I'm going to go, and you put on your suit and tie, right? Because you wouldn't have worn that at work. So you put on a suit and tie and your new dress shoes, and you go down. Had you met up with anybody? Had you been in touch?
Well, no, I actually had intended to go there with some coworkers, one of which I think also was might have stabbed me in the back afterward, but nobody could seem to make it. So there is something in the back of my head that thinks that was maybe set up, but I did end up going myself. And when I had arrived in DC, I went to the Ellipse.
Well, where'd you park your truck? Where'd you park your truck?
That's a good question. It was a nightmare finding parking. I think I parked it somewhere near a McDonald's or something like that.
In
There were
DC,
so many roads blocked off. It was insane.
In DC or somewhere near, and then you walked in. You walked in, right? There was no mass transit.
Right. Yeah. No. I literally just walked the streets until I found the Ellipse. I had to use like Google Maps or something like that.
Okay.
I had to use that like a battery extension too because it was
right.
It was killing my phone. So I've been to DC a couple of times. I was there for the inauguration in 2017, but I don't know the area. So
right.
it took me a minute.
So you find the Ellipse and you're out back and you were listening to the speech. Couldn't hear it very well, or could hear it very well. It's cold, right?
No, you could hear it.
Okay.
You could hear it.
Okay.
And even if you weren't, as close as some people could be, you also had like stereos everywhere. So I mean, you could hear it even down the streets on the way to the Capitol.
Okay. So you go and then you walk up to the Capitol. Now, I want to get to the Capitol in a minute, but instead I want to jump out a little bit and talk about what you were charged with. When you were arrested, they came up to where you worked, which was on a naval base or a naval facility. I don't know if it's a base, and they arrested you. We'll get to the arrest in a minute. But at the moment you were arrested, had you ever been arrested for a violent crime?
Well, I mean, there was an incident when I was like 20, when I was like 19 or 20, when I had to defend my mother.
Okay.
But unfortunately, like that had to happen, but that got dropped.
Okay, so you, I should have said convicted. You never convicted of anything. Yeah. You never did you have? Were you like Did you have 700 speeding tickets? Like, did you speed racing like on down the Jersey Shore, Fast and Furious?
No, unfortunately, I'm not a speed racer.
Okay,
I wish I was.
Well, no, you got.
It would be more interesting if I was.
You had a truck. You had a truck, so you couldn't race anybody. Maybe like, so when you get charged, they charged you with what were the specific charges? And you don't have to get into the names, but it was a misdemeanor, felony, and I think they changed right before the trial with you. But tell me what they were, and then we're going to go back to the Capitol. But what were the charges that when they said, Timothy Hale, he's arrested for this? What were they?
Right. Well, I was initially charged with the same grab bag of misdemeanor nonsense everyone else was, the trespassing, unauthorized entry, stuff like that.
Yep.
After the inauguration, though, that's when I got indicted with the obstruction charge. I also had they charged me with civil disorder,
right?
And then they actually dropped that right before my trial,
right,
so they could supersede my indictment, which seemed like it was a ploy just to reset my speedy trial clock. But yeah, they dropped that. They also dropped another misdemeanor that I think was the blocking of ingress and egress, like blocking a door. So the things that you were charged with, the way they were able to put you in jail and hold you, and again, you in jail, I know this, and out of jail now, out of prison now, I know out of incarceration, you're really pretty well read on this. You became something of a jailhouse lawyer, for lack of a better term, in terms of understanding. But you were held because they could say it was a felony.
and that was the 1512. Now, I suppose they could also say the other obstruction charge, right, or that they had, but that later they dropped that, and it didn't make sense. But the point is, you wouldn't have been held for the misdemeanors, right?
More than likely not. There were a couple people in there who had misdemeanors. I think they were held for other things, such as their prior history,
Right.
or the danger to society. But
Right.
in general, no. Most people who didn't have the obstruction charge who were denied bond were denied for some other felony like assault.
Right, exactly. You didn't have an assault. You never. So now let's go back to the Capitol. I'm sorry to jump around, but I want people to hear that the way they held a lot of these prisoners was by adding this felony charge that was later thrown out by the Supreme Court. And it looks to all from the outside, I can't read their minds, but from the outside, it looks like the prosecutors were adding this in order to put people in jail and then say, look, it's an insurrection. Look at all these people in jail. That's how you can't read it any other way. I can't know their minds. Someday I hope we'll have some of them on under oath and ask them the questions. But for now, what we know. But let's go back. Tim Hale's our guest. We go back to the Capitol, where you are, and you walk up. Did you stay for the whole speech of Trump, or you got tired of it and walked up? What was the timeline?
No, I stayed for most of it. I ended up leaving around a little after the time where they talked about going to the Capitol and marching down.
Okay.
But even then, I was still listening to the speech. So, like I said, there were actually like
Speakers.
stereos, so you could listen to the speech on the walk down.
Right.
And I was even live streaming some of it on my phone too. What's interesting on that point is that nobody really knew anybody. There was no plan to go to the Capitol. And so on my phone, like the first video I record is people in the back, like I'm just recording the speech, but in the background, you can actually hear people say there's some sort of a march going on. So people were starting to leave before Trump actually said to. And of course, the perimeter breach happened around the Capitol long before Trump's speech even finished. That happened a half hour before I showed up. So the timeline is very interesting, how it all just sort of fit together, isn't it?
Yeah. So, all right. So you walk down, and when you get to the Capitol, you arrive at the Capitol, and what do you see? Do you remember what you see?
It changed gradually as the climate changed, of course, but initially it was just a large group of people. I wasn't aware that there was any sort of conflict going on at all. Actually, if you look at the video I recorded on my phone, it just seemed like it was just a protest. It didn't even seem like there were any police there, actually. You could hear people chanting USA. We were singing God Bless America. People were chanting Christ is King. It seemed fairly innocuous.
You're wearing
mundane.
You're wearing a shirt and jacket and tie. Are you wearing a heavy coat on top of that?
No, just a suit and tie.
Suit and tie. So you're wearing a suit and tie. And so, okay, you get to the Capitol. When did you enter the Capitol, and through what entrance?
I would say I entered a quarter after. It's probably about say 2:12 p.m. So I entered through what's called the Senate wing door area. That was the initial breach site where I guess you'd say, well, officially they blamed Dominic Pizzola for breaking the window, but there were other people involved in that who've never been identified. So I mean, that's kind of, but basically I came in after the doors were already opened up to the public.
You didn't break you didn't break a window, did you? You didn't like clean out a window that was already broken so you could reach through, and you didn't push the door in that was chained or anything. By the time you get to it, the doors open. Did you see law enforcement at the doors? Were there people there? So there was
No, I mean, in fact, if you watch the CCTV, there was actually one officer in that entire hallway. He runs up to the door when the first breach there is happening. He pulls out a can of mace, he sprays it for 1 second, and then he leaves. And there's 5 photographers standing behind him waiting for it to happen. Seems pretty staged, honestly.
Right. Okay.
You think there would be more cops around the perimeter, in the building? What's going on?
So Nancy Pelosi admitted that she didn't have it. She lost control of it. I mean,
yes.
But you go through that door. Now you're at what level? You're at the main level that would be like the rotunda level. Is that where that is? I don't know that. I don't know it well enough.
No. So the rotunda is on the second floor.
Okay. You're on the first floor.
Yeah, I'm on the first floor on the west side. So I enter the Senate wing door area, and then I kind of just wander around. You see me go to the right, I go to the left.
Do you remember what you felt, what you were thinking? Do you remember how you felt walking in those doors?
I have no idea what's going on. It's like I don't know where I'm going. I'm just following the crowd. And it's like what I was just saying is like I go to the right when I go through the door. I go to the right, I'm following people. I stop in the hallway, I turn around, I follow someone else, I go to the left, and then I go back to the right again. I end up in an area called the crypt. And then like again, I'm just wandering around looking at statues. I'm
Did you
posing.
did
I
you
take a
did you
pic.
did you ever like push anybody? Did you ever knock over a statue? Did you ever find a lectern on the ground? Any of that kind of stuff?
No, that's a different guy.
I know, I
No,
know, I know,
no,
but
no, no, no. I never took anything from the building. I didn't break anything. I didn't. I literally was like a tourist. I was dancing in the Capitol Visitor Center.
wait a
Like I was
second.
just
Were you
goofball.
actually dancing?
I literally was dancing. And when they said it in the trial too, like people were laughing. It was kind of like I was like, sorry, I was dancing.
Do you
But
do you do you dance in public a lot?
I guess when I'm being a troll, but not normally, I guess.
Oh wait, you were in the visitor center, so you moved out of the Capitol into the visit. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So when you have the crypts and there's this little connector area called Crypt Lobby East,
Okay,
and that takes you to some escalators that go down into what is the visitor center.
I see.
Um, it's just kind of like an empty area. I mean, I didn't actually go on the tour. I wasn't scheduled for it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Did,
but
did you see law enforcement over there? Were there cops over there saying it's time to get out, or was there any interaction?
not initially. Eventually, there were some cops came out of some doors eventually, and then they kind of had like a powwow with us. It's like it's kind of like weird. Like this is a story you're never gonna hear. I have the video of it, but initially, like people are freaking out because they think the cops are attacking them or whatever. But eventually, like we just have like this coming together moment, and we talked to the cops for like 10 minutes straight. And we're like, hey, some people are like, hey, why are you attacking the crowd outside? And the cops are actually pretty cool. They're actually like, listen, we're Trump supporters. We don't want to do what we're doing, but we got to get you guys out of here. And so the cops actually escorted us back to the initial place where I came in, the Senate wing door area. But what's interesting is that as they're trying to lead us out, a second breach happens as they're trying to seal it. This is where Matthew Perna almost gets crushed. And so like as they're trying to get us out, a bunch of people force their way back in. And so it's
Oh,
just like it's like we eventually had to go out the window because the door was just people were just pouring through it again. So it seemed kind of like it was a timed breach, just like the first one was. But
so when
you know,
you how long were you in the Capitol area completely? How many
I would
minutes?
say about roughly 40 minutes,
Okay.
maybe 30 to 40 minutes.
And in order to leave, you had to climb out the window, or is it a big window that you walk out?
It was one of the first windows that were broken into. So I walked through an open door and then I had to leave out the window.
But
Yeah.
was a window when you some people don't think like there's sometimes windows that are 10 feet high and it's not like was it a small
No.
window you had to crawl out of?
Yeah, I had to climb up and like jump through it. Yeah.
And
That was how they got that was how I had to exit.
were the
Not as comfortable as the entry.
were were the security still with you at that point, or had they peeled off? Were they?
They were kind of like some of them were more lost than anything. Like they were like it was just kind of like I don't know. Some of them stood to the side and they were just talking to people. Some of them were I guess were trying to direct the flow of traffic through. So what I think what ended up happening was as these new people were coming through the doors, the cops just kind of were like, all right, you got to go through the hallway. And then they directed them through the hallways, through the crypt again, and out the back on the other side of the building through what's called the memorial door. So it is kind of interesting how like they basically had to create a bunch of detours, I guess, in order to get certain people out. But there was a lot of coordination in terms of how the breaches started. You can definitely tell if you watch the video.
All right, so all that time that you're in there, you may have been, you don't really know, you didn't at the time know, you may have been in the wrong unauthorized space, right? You may have been, but you didn't have any assaults, no batteries, no, you weren't in physical, you didn't get a fist fight with anybody. What was the story with the flag? There was a flag at one point that I read in your stuff. You had a flag, you picked up a flag?
So there's two flags.
Okay.
On the staircase leading up to the Capitol from the scaffolding area, I picked up this tiny little like 3-inch flag that was on the ground or whatever. And so I pick it up.
American flag or Trump flag?
The little American flag. It was like this big. It was a
okay.
little American flag. I pick it off the ground. It's like, you can't disrespect my flag. So I pick it off the floor.
Okay.
And they tried to accuse me of like tampering with the door, but like you can clearly see I pick the flag up. And so as soon as I walk through the doors of the Capitol, I've got this little flag and I'm just like, and so I'm wandering through the Capitol. And then on the way out, a guy who's in front of me, to get through the window, he falls over because of the people pouring in through the doors.
Okay.
And I wasn't tracking this at all. I was already out of it from lack of sleep. So I just see a Trump flag on the floor so I'm like, oh, hey, there's a Trump flag. Cool. I pick up the flag. Now they accuse, so again, I was kind of set up here, so bear with me because of how ridiculous this sounds. But when I was home after January 6th, NCIS had my roommate wear a wire. And so he tries to get me to say incriminating things while I've been drinking. So I say some ridiculous stuff like, yeah, this flag was launched through the air like a javelin. And I'm like, it's basically to say like I picked up a weapon that was used in a bunker. That never happened. It's clear on the CCTV. It's completely made up.
Right.
I said it for the heck of it.
It
was.
How old are you? How old are you at the time you say that?
I would have been. I guess I would have been 30 years old at the time.
30 and drinking and being cool with your buddies. I get to pick a picture, but
it's not Braveheart.
Well, but
it's not.
But
it wasn't a movie.
But the
like,
video
people
showed
don't throw
it.
javelin. It wasn't real.
But the video shows it is the real thing. That you said CCTV. That's the closed caption TV that they can see. There was nothing thrown. There was no. Okay, keep going. So that's the famous. And how long did you hold that? How long did you?
That's the story.
Did you?
It was just there. They got it out of my truck, and then at my trial, this is the hilarious part. They bring the flag in this giant cardboard box, like it's it's Schwarzenegger, carrying a rifle inside of a box of roses or something like that. Like here it is, we got it. They bring it in for the jury to see in this box, like it's this serious thing. It's just a flag. It's literally just a flag, and it wasn't even mine technically. I just found it.
Right.
So it was a totally embellished thing, but it was part of the reason for denying me bond. So of all the lies, like that's one of the most egregious. Not really the most egregious, but it's terrible because they knew it wasn't true. They could have watched their own video and shown it. They should have stopped using that argument, but it just kept being used. It's crazy.
Did they use it at the trial?
They did.
But for what? For
just to show it as evidence, I suppose. They did the same thing with my suit. They brought it in this big paper bag, like it was a lunch bag or something. They bring it in, they pull the suit out, and here's the real funny thing. They used the wrong shoes. They used sneakers, running shoes that didn't even go with the suit. I'm like, they couldn't even find my shoes.
But why would that be bad? You're not supposed to wear a suit when you're going to Washington, D.C.? I don't know. What was the point? Just to make it seem
I guess
odd?
it was for identification purposes, just beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm a bad boy who had a flag.
Okay, I got you. All right, so you're in jail. You're in the jail in D.C. held, unable to get bail. Because you're so quote dangerous. Even though you worked for the Navy all those years, the Army all those years, all that kind of stuff, and you finally go to trial. How long did the trial last? What were the results, and what were you convicted of? What exactly?
It took about a week. It was about a full week, actually. A work week. Actually, it was a work week. The voir dire hearings were on Monday. The trial lasted until Thursday, and then the decision was made on Friday. It took 16 months for me to get a speedy trial, which is not a speedy trial. And then, the result was a conviction on every charge, including the now one felony I have, which is not actually a felony, it turns out.
We're talking with Tim Hale again, and some of your stories over at PatriotFreedomProject.com, which is an organization that your aunt and I work with to help defendants and their families of January 6th, ProAmericaReport.com. But let me back up for a second, Tim. Your background, your parents. What's your background in terms of your ethnicity? What's your background in terms of where you grew up. What is that? Walk me through that. I know some of it, but it's better to hear you say it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from New Jersey, pretty diverse area. I was born in like the Jersey Shore area. Grew up in Bradley Beach. Spent a lot of my life in Freehold. My family's very mixed, so there's a lot of Puerto Ricans, Jews, Italians. It's very mixed. So
Your father was from Puerto Rico, isn't he? Is that true or not?
I mean, I think he was actually born in New York, but
Oh,
yeah, he's not from the island. But funny enough, this is for anybody who's interested in you know factoids. There are more Puerto Ricans here in the States than there are on the island. Actually, there's 3 million on the island, 5 million here. Maybe
Okay,
it's 8.
okay,
Anyway, just random fact.
but my point is, he's Puerto Rican. He may live in New York. Puerto Ricans are Americans, so I'm not saying where he's Puerto Rican. Your mother is ethnic, including in her family are Jews, right? Jewish. She has Jewish heritage in her family, right?
Yeah, so I'm ethnically mixed, Hispanic. I'm not what you would call I'm not an Aryan like the
Right.
government would allege.
Right.
So
Now,
yeah, it's
now let's talk about that. Because I think this is when I think of this case, Tim. When it first was ongoing, I thought, wow, it's almost impossible to sort of recover from that. And I didn't know you well, and now that I know you, you probably could recover from anything that's kind of your personality. But also, I think that the reality of the 1512 being thrown out now, and more that we're finding out about how disreputable and dishonest and unjust the prosecution was. But in the midst of this, they have your phone. So let's go back to the arrest. Somebody gets a wire on your roommate. They listen in and to your roommate, but you're arrested within how long of January 6th?
1 week.
So they run a wire.
He wore a wire on me on a Friday, or excuse me, on the 14th. I was arrested on the 15th.
And that was now afterwards. That was NCIS, the Naval Investigation, working with the FBI.
Correct.
So they work out together that fast, and they come up there, and then you're arrested. Tell me about the arrest. Now, again, you're a civilian employee with clearances to work on naval weapons, and you're Army reservist. Tell me how they arrested you.
So I was on the way to the pet store that night so I could buy food for my aquarium. And as I'm going on the off ramp to get off the base to get on the highway, I just see a bunch of lights behind me. And a part of me is thinking, because there's a firehouse on the base, and they usually leave so that they can, sometimes they leave so they can help local fire departments or whatever. But very quickly I realized, here it is. It's coming. It's happening right now. I get pulled over by dozens of vehicles. Before I can even think about anything, I got guns pointed at me through the window, telling me to get out. So I just quickly turned the truck off, put the keys on top of the dash, and I don't resist, but I still got pretty much tackled to the ground. It was so rough, and I didn't necessarily realize it at the time. I think it was because of the adrenaline, but my legs were soaked in blood because they had actually torn the skin off my legs from the ground.
You're wearing shorts? You were wearing shorts?
No, I was wearing jeans, and they didn't pad that at all.
Huh.
Yeah, so I mean, I still have the scars on my legs. They've mostly healed, but it took about a year for it to fully heal.
You said at the beginning of that you thought, oh no, here we go. Did you think that you were, because of January 6th, at that moment, did you think you might be in trouble for that?
A part of me didn't know what was going to happen. Well, of course I couldn't have known what was happening, but I had this sneaking suspicion, one, because of my management, two, because something about the way my roommate was acting the night before didn't sit right with me.
Okay.
Three, you need to remember too, it's actually suspicious how few people they've gone after because of clearly they can use facial recognition software,
right,
geo tracking. I clearly was in the building. There's no reason I don't think they could have, they wouldn't have been able to track my phone,
right,
or to have identified me. And keep in mind also, especially for those in the military, they own you. So, I mean, they had my DNA.
Right.
They have your fingerprints. I mean, they have all of that. So especially for someone like me, you would think maybe I was a high value target because you could say the enemy within or something like that. Insider
Uh,
threats.
uh, you,
That's
you,
something
you,
you
you,
learn
you,
about that a lot in the military.
you lost your job, right? Then the naval, the contract employee, you're gone, so you lost your job, and then the army did it. What discharge? How did that go?
Well, yeah. So regarding, I'll address the military thing first. The military started processing me out before I even had a hearing. I was actually still being held up in the jail in Newark. I wasn't even near DC yet, and I was already getting paperwork from JAG, uh, saying that they were preparing to chapter me out of the military. I had never had a hearing. I wasn't convicted of anything. I wasn't even indicted at that point, I don't think. And so, yeah, they were just preparing to kick me out of the military without even hearing my side of the story. And so, yeah, they rushed to kick me out. Now, as for and my JAG officer, the initial JAG officer I had, he didn't care. Like he didn't even try to fight for me. He actually, we have these emails where he's saying, "You're out of your mind if you think we were ever going to help you." Um, and then on the other side, for the Navy or for the contracting firm I worked for, I have reason to believe that actually I was, well, again, I know I was set up by my employer, but one of the reasons for me to say this too isn't just the adversarial relationship between union and management. It was because I was actually working with Congressman Chris Smith's office to investigate the employer and the base well, for a violation of labor laws and a few other things. Chris Smith totally abandoned me after that, but I was actually making some headway. So if you want to talk about, again, I'm not Edward Snowden or anything like that, but like I was somewhat of a whistleblower too. I think that also put a target on my back. I was trying to bring real change to for my employees.
So,
So
did they seize your truck? No, they didn't seize your truck. But did they took your belongings? They took your suit.
they
They
took
took what else did they
yeah,
take?
they didn't take my vehicle.
No,
They did take some of my personal property,
like
and it's
what?
strange. They took all of my electronics. They took my computers. They took my phone. They took yeah, pretty much everything that could be plugged into a cord or plugged into an outlet. They took, and this was pretty bad because I mean it basically hurt my ability to defend myself because and they also, I'll say this too, they seized my social media, and so the feds literally deleted my Facebook account and my Instagram and stuff like that. So I don't even have records of my military graduation photos. They literally basically wiped my entire life away just so that they could build their narrative against me and I couldn't defend myself.
So, did you ever get any of that back? Have you received it
No.
back now? Do they answer when you ask for it back? Do they say somehow you forfeited it because of the trial?
No, no. I mean, I've had lawyers try to reach out to them. They're non-responsive. Um, I don't know what it's going to take. It's been over 3 years. I still don't have my property back.
All right.
And I'm
So,
not sure my suit's going to fit me still. But
I think that's right. I was going to point that out to you. I've noticed that. No more prison food. You're becoming
appreciate
becoming like the
Yeah,
rest
no,
of
but,
us.
but
But like I want to go back to this part of it
sure.
because you, I think, over almost anyone of all the people, were a target of an op regarding you personally. So your dad's Puerto Rican, your mom's part Jewish. You come from all this ethnic stuff. I'm not going to say it. I think I can say it right. You come from humble beginnings, working class background. You work for Army Reserve. You never had an issue. Navy hires you as a civilian employee. Never had an issue. Okay, and all that. And when they'd seize your phone, they go through your phone, and at a certain point, they leak photos from your phone. First, has anyone confirmed that they leaked it? Is there anyone that admitted it? That when you had your trial, did anyone say, yeah, of course, we wanted to tell the world what we were building the case, because that's what they did. But is there someone who's admitted that?
Not to my knowledge. In fact, some of the more egregious things they tried to use against me were kind of suppressed.
By the
Sort of.
judge, but not by the media.
Right. The thing is that even in the trial, the prosecution still peppered things in and never got punished for it.
Of course.
Um, yeah, I mean, no objection really made a difference at that point. But before that, yeah, I mean, it is interesting how the state gets to poison the well by leaking things to the press. And to an extent, you might say, okay, the public has a right to some level of transparency for these sorts of proceedings because
That's
it's such
not,
a
but wait a
monumental.
second, wait a second, wait a second. That's not in the Constitution. What's in the Constitution is that a defendant has rights. The public doesn't
Sure.
have a right to see things that help the public feel better about what the government's doing. I mean, I know what you're saying. You're trying to be
Yeah.
nice. You're trying to
Well,
you're trying to be
I'm
kind.
I'm pulling some punches here because I know that there are freedom of information requests and stuff like that,
Nobody did
but
that.
it was absolutely an attempt to smear me and to prejudice any possible jury against me, and it was bad enough that we were in D.C.
Right.
But the way they dealt with my case, especially, I think was pretty bad.
Well, but last week, 10 days ago, Snopes, which is a liberal outfit, admitted that the Charlottesville, what's called the Fine People hoax, was a
Yeah.
fraud. They admitted it was a fraud. Now, a lot of us have been saying this for a long time. This idea, I've been in Republican politics for my whole life. I've been in conservative politics my whole life. I've been to events in every part of the country. I've never met people that are anti-Semitic that come up and say, I'm proud to be a Republican. Don't you agree with this position? I've met people like that, but they're not Republican. I've never met a white supremacist that is actively a part of the Republican Party. I've never seen it. And so the Fine People hoax in Charlottesville, where they claim that President Trump referred to white supremacists and anti-Semites as fine people, that's a lie. And now it's been shown to be a lie. It's confirmed. But during the time period where you were held, besides using a fake law, a law that was not designed to be used against people that were protesting, parading, showing up. It was meant for evidence. That's what the Supreme Court said. Paper documents, things that were destroyed. So they used a fake law to make it a felony. And in your case, they used your phone and took a photo and leaked a photo to say, look, these people, MAGA people, are anti-Semitic. And the photo was of you. I've heard you say it before. You had like a mustache shaved in such a way that you looked vaguely like Hitler, and making jokes about it. Again, not your best moment, but not illegal, but also leaked in such a way that it made it that the whole class of people could be painted as something, and the whole jury pool could be. What happened? When did you first hear that photo was out and being posted on the internet?
So this is the interesting thing, is that it was almost like this was all assembled piecemeal, because
Right.
what I think happened is that I think with that photo in particular of the imitation Austrian painter, I think that was something that kind of was not the initial. I don't think that was the initial play. I think the initial play was to try to make me into some, Timothy McVeigh type character. One of the things they initially did was they tried to use books that I had in my book collection. That, I feel, was more prominent in my first bond hearing in front of the magistrate judge. I think that the mustache picture, I think that actually kind of came in afterward once they finally went through my phone. So again, I think it was piecemeal,
I see.
but I think there always was sort of the grand plan to turn me into this volatile extremist that needed to be restrained for the public good.
But it's one thing in a hearing where you have ostensibly you have a counsel opposite them, and they say, look at the books on his shelf. He's got the Bible, and he's got Mein Kampf, and he's got Mao's Little Red Book, and he's got Alinsky's Guide, and he's got David Horowitz, and he's got, by the way, I don't know if you have any of those books, but I'm saying that's the kinds of things and they say, see, in a hearing, they say, see, this person has, he's really, out there. And then your lawyer or one's lawyer can jump up and say, well, look, the guy read history all the time. He was, he's kind of a reader type. He's not a writer. He's a reader. He's not he doesn't play video Dungeons and Dragons. He's a reader. And so he's got all these, you would at least have the adversarial thing. the leaking of the photo where you resemble Hitler or whatever, goofing around, whatever that is, that was done in such a way that you had to live with it everywhere you turned. It wasn't in a proceeding, right? You're in jail with people that are going to say, "Aha, you're like that," and you're like, "What are you talking about?" And then you're dealing with the media calling your family and friends and a jury pool. I mean, when did you realize that had been leaked?
I think that stuff, once it got to that point, I'd say it would have been maybe March of 21. The thing is that I arrived in the DC jail, I think it was February 3rd of 2021. And so during that period, there was like this month of limbo where my public defender wasn't really doing anything. And so we still hadn't had a bond hearing. And so what ultimately ended up happening is that I think those pictures ultimately came from the court filings where their opposition to bond motions probably contained those pictures. And so I think that's how really it got disseminated through the public. And that's how they do a lot of dirty things too. So yeah, that's when I really became aware of it. As you know, there wasn't much communication inside of the jail, but we had these black bricks called communication tablets where you could send a message to someone who was on your family list or something like that. But you also had this little feature where you could look at news articles, which was basically just propaganda from CNN.
Right.
So the basically it's like anytime there was an article about me, it was just that picture, Nazi, this, that, and the other thing. People say, sources say, so according to sources, and then that's basically what it was. So I think early spring is when I realized,
but like
wow,
two,
this
like
is,
a
this
month,
is going to be the narrative.
Yeah, 2 months after, not 6 months after, within weeks afterwards. Have you ever been to a Nazi rally?
No, I have not. I
mean,
wouldn't know where to find one.
Right. I mean, so
I'd have to go to an FBI building probably.
that's well. So Tim Hale is our guest. Tim, almost 3 full years in jail, in prison, incarcerated, and you were convicted. How long did the trial was a week, and the jury deliberated for how long?
I think it was a couple hours.
Yeah. So you're convicted. You get sentenced. You serve almost 3 years. When you look back on it, you don't seem as bitter and angry as I would if I was you. I'm bitter and angry, and I'm not even you. How do you feel about this? And I guess they took away, all of your stuff, your life, your job, and all. How do you feel about the future?
I can't say I'm not angry, but I've always been told that I'm a very stoic person, and so I always say that I take the world how it is, not how I want it to be. And so I've always been able to kind of absorb horrible things as they're happening in real time instead of bottling it up or just kind of ignoring it. Um, I feel vindicated. I made it clear to my judge, and he accepted it. The reason I went to trial is because I didn't agree that the law was being applied appropriately, and he actually accepted that at face value. I never accepted that the 1512 charge was legitimate. If you want to say I was trespassing, I mean, that's if we want to squabble over the misdemeanors or whatever, that's one thing. But people didn't go there to obstruct proceedings, and they didn't go there to tamper with documents. I drew a line in the sand. I understand not everybody, people with families, people with a lot more to lose than I understand not everybody could have fallen on that sword, but I chose to fall on that sword. I feel vindicated, and I think that I don't know. I'm happy. I'm happy with the momentum. I'll say that. It's taken 3 years. I wish I didn't have to lose 3 years of my life to win this battle, but I won.
So let me go back to something I just forgot. I'm looking at my notes. You climb out the window of the Capitol. You got to wander back to your car. You got your phone, and you find your car, and you drive home. What time do you get home?
Let's see. I'd say I left after probably between 4 and 6 p.m. because I think because I left DC like right before that curfew thing happened.
Right.
That the mayor kind of put out there.
Yeah.
I'd say it would have happened before my work shift, because I went to work again that night.
Oh, you
So
did. You did.
I went right back to work, like basically like nothing happened. And then I actually went to military duty that weekend. So if I was dangerous, you'd think I would have, something would have happened while I was working for the government immediately after. It never happened. So yeah, I worked that night.
What time did the shift start?
I think it would have been between about 8 o'clock.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you had to hightail it home to get home to work. So you go back to
Yep.
work, and you go back to your life and all. And again, you weren't there with any friends. You never met up with any friends. You didn't coordinate with any friends on let's go here, let's go there, let's do this, let's do that. Right? I mean, there was never you discover that when you got to the door that there was 8 buddies of yours from your Army unit or anything. You never linked up with anybody, right?
Yeah, no, the fraternity bros weren't there at the time. No.
No, so there was no my point is there was no coordinated. When you look at it now, do you think there was coordinated activity going on?
Yeah, I absolutely do think there was.
What kind?
Absolutely.
In what form?
I think that there was coordination, which led to the initial breach of the first perimeter. Not just for the fact that there were like no police really guarding the perimeter, like a handful of cops, but I think that when you look at the video, it's clear that there were actors who were embedded inside the crowd. It's clear that there were people that day who were on bullhorns, who were directing the movement of crowds.
Right.
But I also think, I also think that when you just look at the way certain people move, you see certain hand signs, you see people using flags. I think to coordinate. I think that also when you like rallying points, I think that when you look at the CCTV, I think that there are people in the inside of the building who are coordinating breaches with people on the outside. So when you look at all the timestamps, a lot of interesting things happen at the same time. And so like when you look at the breach of, let's say, the Columbus doors, it's interesting that happens right around the same time as the breach that allowed people like me to wander into the Capitol Visitor Center in Crypt Lobby East. And an FBI informant named James Knowles, who infiltrated the Proud Boys, he was involved in these kinds of breaches. So I think that if you really lay it all out, the memorial door is an interesting person. He puts zip ties on the memorial door at the same time that someone is using a fire extinguisher to attack the cops. He sprays them, they run away, and they have to break this door open. This actually pulls officers away from the very line that was holding the crowd back from Crypt Lobby East, which is where James Knowles ended up being. So I do think that various breaches happened simultaneously or very close to one another as basically as part of a plan to have timed breaches that would flood the Capitol with people at the same time from both sides of the building. I think there were actors on the inside and outside that were either in communication with one another, or they might have been, and you might be familiar with this, in terms of conspiracies, you have things that are called like hub and spoke conspiracies or wheel and spoke.
Right.
There's the idea that, or chain conspiracy. There are kinds of conspiracies where you have multiple actors who don't know they're working as part of a larger scheme. They're just playing a certain role. So I would say that it's such a large operation that not everybody who was involved in it would even know who they were also working with. As funny as that might sound.
Yeah, no, I think that's now Tim Hale's our guest. In the jail, as part of your defense, you were allowed access to video for your defense. So you watched a lot of video. That was video that had to be limited by definition of the law to stuff that related to you. Then there was the rest of the video that has now been released, a chunk of it, not enough of it, but some of it. You've looked at a lot of video. You now have looked at a lot of video. You've done a lot of analysis. I know some of what you just said is coming from that, but is stemming from that analysis. But tell me more about what you think was going on, and if you had to sort of pinpoint, who could be the universe of people responsible? Is it Pelosi and incompetence with a dose of a few leftists who are stoking this? Is it broader than that? I don't mind. I want to know what you think, because you you had a lot of time to think about it and a lot of time to look at a lot of video and a lot of what went on and talk to a lot of guys that were there about what they saw and heard. So you're kind of a subject matter expert at this point.
Yeah, I think that kind of branching off on what we just talked about, um, I think that all the groups that they've went after, like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, I think that they were all framed, and I think that the government cherry picked a lot of their circumstantial evidence to paint a narrative that was out of context. But I will say it's interesting when you look at the history of these groups as a whole and their leadership positions, or just it's interesting to think about how infiltrated these groups were. And so we actually know, especially with the Oath Keeper cases, how many people basically folded very quickly. And so just like how the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys had informants who testified against their co-defendants, there were probably people who set those groups up from the beginning. And I would say that this is also true for regular people who were never affiliated with anything. I think that the crowds were probably filled with plainclothed agitators. Certainly seems like that. We have some names for some of them that like sort of like the sedition hunters have their hashtags. We kind of made our own inside the jail. And so I think that initially there were agitators who incited conflict between the crowd and the police. I think that the police had malicious elements as well. I also think there was a lot of incompetence. If you watch their body cameras, it's very clear a lot of them have absolutely no idea what the hell they're doing. They're not prepared for this. They don't know how to use their own equipment. They're not properly trained. They're actually kind of dumb. And I don't say that to be disrespectful of law enforcement, but like their superiors will literally tell them on camera, don't spray the crowd anymore. It's going to blow back in our face because of the wind. And they do it anyway. And that's exactly what happens. A lot of the injuries officers sustained that day, for instance, were from blowback or from friendly fire. There was a video where the officers launched an ordnance explosive and it actually blew up on another officer's neck from behind. And so there was a lot of incompetence. I do think if you look at one of the body cameras, there's an officer who says they set us up. They set us up. And so when you think about that, this is the Metro PD. Keep in mind, the Capitol PD don't even have body cameras. It's only the Metro PD.
Right.
And so when you think about that, who set them up? Because Trump, of course, offered National Guard support. Yes, Pelosi, she took credit. 3 years later, we're finally hearing this officially. But the Metro PD answered to Mayor Bowser. The Capitol PD answered to Nancy Pelosi. And so this really seems like a Democrat inside job. It could also include some, turncoat Republicans. Wouldn't surprise me. Just look at the unselect committee hearings. So you certainly had some rhino turncoats in there as well. Because really, if you really think about this, you have people who are operating inside the Capitol, opening up entryways, coordinating with groups on the outside, doing all this and that and the other thing. How would someone even know to do that? I'm not familiar with the inside of the Capitol. I mean, I would think that you'd have to get that information from someone who works inside the Capitol.
Tim? Do you want some people to be held accountable for this? Do you have, when you look at it and say there's people that did this to American citizens, did it to you?
I mean, I certainly think that people need to be held accountable. The question, of course, is that ever going to happen, and how would that happen? My main priority, and I've said this time and again, it's not even financial compensation. My main priority is just getting these dudes out of jail and prison who shouldn't be there. But in terms of holding people accountable, yeah, I mean, that would be great. But you see how hard it is to get someone outside. A guy pulls a fire alarm to obstruct an official proceeding, nothing happens. How hard is it going to be to get someone who orchestrated a fake insurrection to help sabotage a presidential election?
Right.
I hate to be black-pilled, and I'm not black-pilled. I'm just, this is truly how corrupt it is. I mean, it was a color revolution. It was a false flag. And those things that are so coordinated like that are not only hard to expose, they're also hard to punish.
Yeah.
going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot harder to punish insiders who orchestrated that than it's going to be to punish middle America who wandered into the situation.
Tim, what have I not asked you? I tried to walk through the whole thing, again, I think people need to realize that the egregiousness of this to me is that, as you pointed out, you said it best. If you want to talk about whether you went in the wrong place, trespassed, or went in an unauthorized area, fine. But the rest of it was really twisted. Oh, one thing. You mentioned that you had a certain experience. You were arrested on the 14th or 15th of January. Then Biden gets sworn in. Within days, the whole tenor of the thing changes. So, but my point on this was that it's not that the Trump FBI or the FBI during the Trump days was doing nothing. They were actually, but it changed dramatically on inauguration.
I mean, that seems to be the case. I mean, we've heard all these things about shock and awe. I do think that, yeah, there was an element at the start where they just wanted to round people up because I'm not a mind reader.
Right.
I think that a lot of these officers who were picking people up probably didn't even know what to expect. I
Right.
think a lot of them believed the hype around it. I think they believed their own hype, honestly. Um, the guys who picked me up seemed very angry. They had a personal issue with me.
Huh.
And so I think that I think a lot of these FBI guys, I think that they
Believe the hype or
yeah, and again, if you get into the stuff with the DC jail, I think a lot of the mistreatment, sure, some of it might come from above. I think a lot of the initial mistreatment we got was from people who took it a little too personal because of, their relation to DC.
right.
Um, I think that with time, people kind of, woke up, and that's when they started treating us a little less egregiously in the jail. But as for the feds, I think the feds, in terms of like the agents or whatever, I can't read their minds, but I don't know. I think they're just foot soldiers for the most part. I don't. They say never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity. So there's that. Some of them were kind of not bright, but I think that the decision to prosecute from the prosecutors and the DOJ, that was absolutely malicious. There was no reason to indict me, and it only happened after the inauguration. Now, again, I can't see behind the scenes. If you want to say maybe it was always in the works, but the administration was going to change soon anyway.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
there's that. But I think that if people were left with the initial charges they got, I don't think there would have been such an outcry um, from January 6ers. But what they chose to do was hunt us down and treat us essentially, well, like their narrative. They said it was an insurrection. They called us terrorists, and that's how they wanted to treat us. They wanted to treat us like Al Qaeda. They didn't call us rioters. They didn't call us protesters who got out of hand. They called us insurrectionists. They called us terrorists. That's how they prosecuted us. It was wrong, but I mean that was their goal. So it makes perfect sense that's how they started prosecuting us after the administration changed. I mean,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have nothing to run on. Just as an aside, they have nothing to run on. Abortion seems like kind of like a stinker right now. They all have the insurrection thing, and people don't even believe it anymore.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was kind of a long game politically. That's what
Yeah.
I think.
So Tim, a lot more we could cover, but anything I forgot to ask you that jumps out? If I try to cover most of the ground. Anything that I didn't talk to you about in this this sort of narrative experience?
Well, I am an Aries, so I think you missed that.
Okay.
Other than, um, I would just say
It's almost
part of the
it's 4th of July in a couple days. Are you still pro America, or are you mad at America right now?
America 24/7. I'll say this. One of the things that got us through the burdens of the jail was kind of banding together.
Uh-huh.
So I'm grateful that people like you and my Aunt Cindy. I'm glad that you were able to accomplish on the outside what a lot of the guys on the inside were able to do. And so I'm glad that you were there to hold the families together, hold them
Right.
over, and give them the support they needed, especially back at a time when it wasn't an election year,
Yeah.
and people weren't pretending suddenly like they cared about us, because people didn't care about us back then, but you
Yeah.
did. And I appreciate you being there to, to support the families. If it wasn't for you, I don't know if Patriot Freedom Project would have gotten as far as it did.
Well,
I'm
you're nice to
proud to have
say.
had you on our side.
Yeah, no, you're nice to say, Tim, but I think you said it earlier. We have momentum, right? We have momentum. It's not just one person, it's now a bunch of people. But I really think that your story, the truth of your story, which was in a way a burden, how they leaked, what they said and all, is now sort of the quintessential example. It's almost like what you were saying the whole time, which is, wait, that's not, what are you doing here? It's now clear that they were doing that to everybody. They're doing it to the country. They're gaslighting the whole country about January 6th and so much else. But we have to get accountability. We have to. And you're right. Your Aunt Cindy is spectacular, and it's been great. PatriotFreedomProject.com. So I think, Tim, I encourage you more and more. Telling your story, I think, makes a difference for people, and people knowing exactly what they were doing to an American citizen. Again, not to be disrespectful to people. I interviewed earlier on my radio show a homeless guy who was on drugs for 15 years in the streets, on homeless. But you were working, in the Army, serving the Navy, security clearances, no violence, and they do that to you? You realize they could do it to anyone. That's what you realize, and they will if we don't get more accountability. So
I think that was the message.
Yeah.
I think the message was the people who make the country work better, keep making it work and stop complaining. Otherwise, they're going to come for you.
Yeah. Haunting. Okay. Hey, Tim, happy 4th of July, and thank you. I'm sure I'll see you soon, and keep up the good work. We're very grateful that you're free now and home. And I think that, as Donald Trump met with some of those kids, the family members of the J6ers, and he looked at him, he said, your life is going to be great. He said, your life is going to be great. And for those kids, they're thinking, Dad's gone. What am I going to do? And I think the same thing when I look at you, Tim, that your life is going to be great. Went through a lot of hell to get to this moment, but there'll be a lot of great things ahead. So thank you for the time. Tim Hale, everybody. We appreciate it, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you. All right, we'll wrap things up. Let me say thank you to Rumble in our DC studio here. They do a great job. Thank you, Dylan, for hosting us, and for all the team here. That was a long interview because I just think we have to start telling these stories, and there's more. He's a really good communicator, Tim. He's a great speaker. He will be a voice people hear, and they thought they had him pinned down and trapped in a narrative that he couldn't get out of. And just like they did to Trump, they misread the man and misread the moment. And so it's going to be exciting to see. So happy 4th of July, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to check out all of our episodes on Rumble and use Rumble for everything you're doing. They're a great company doing great things to allow us free speech and our content creation. So we're grateful for that. Happy 4th of July. We'll be back soon. It's Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. Visit proamericareport.com. You see right there on the screen. Sign up so you get our regular emails, and we'll talk very soon.